Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Modern SharePoint plus Akumina's EXP equals a true digital workplace experience. I will be your moderator today. My name is Michael Scott, Vice President of Marketing at Akumina. Before we begin, I want to go over a couple housekeeping items. So we will be recording this webinar, and it will be sent out within 24 to 48 hours, so keep an eye out in your inbox for our presentation. Q&A will follow, so feel free to ask your questions at any time, though, in the GoToWebinar panel by selecting the questions drop-down. Just make sure you submit your questions to all panelists. Addition to that, please follow us on LinkedIn at Akumina as well as at Centric. Before we get into the full presentation, I did want to send out a couple poll questions just to sort of get a level set of where everyone's at in their digital workplace journey to help with the discussion later in the presentation. So with that said, I'm going to launch the first one. We'll give you guys 30 seconds to fill it out. Once done, we will move to the next one and then begin the presentation. All right, thank you for that. So the next question we would like to know is, do you have a digital workplace experience in your organization currently? And again, we'll let this go for another 15 seconds and then move to our final poll, and then we'll begin. All right, let's get to that last one. So the last one is, what is the current state of your digital workplace experience for those of you who have one? And again, just another 10 seconds and we'll begin the presentation. All righty, thank you to everyone for participating in that. With that said, I'm going to quickly go through the agenda and then pass it off to Dave and Sean. So today we'll be going over our introductions. We'll start there. We'll move over to the state of the modern digital workplace. We'll cover a modern SharePoint overview. Following that, we'll talk about what actually is Akumina and how it fits into this presentation. Following that, we will talk about the power of modern SharePoint along with Akumina. We'll give a brief demonstration of the solution, and then we'll finish off with questions. And again, just as a reminder for the questions, you can ask them at any time during the presentation. Just make sure you submit them to all panelists in the questions drop down. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Maffei.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to chat with Sean and I today. Sean and I have known each other for a number of years and collaborated on a lot of digital workplace strategy engagements. So we hope that you find this information useful. And certainly feel free to follow up with me after. I'm Akumina's president and one of the co-founders. And for me, I think the thing that I get most excited about with our business is I often get to serve as the executive sponsor with our largest global enterprise customers. And Akumina's got north of 4 million daily active users on our modern workplace platform. And so there's a lot of customers there that allow us to interact with them and understand what digital workplace strategy means to them and how they're implementing that digital workplace strategy across their enterprise. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And with that said, Sean, you can feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Dave. My name is Sean McDonough. I'm a Microsoft Office Apps and Services MVP, and I've been one for the last handful of years. I've been working with SharePoint for ages now, what seems like probably an entire career. And in fact, I have had a career out of it going back to 2004, and that makes me one of the old guard. So I've been with SharePoint in its oldest form up to what is now the modern incarnation of SharePoint. I didn't actually start in SharePoint. My background is in polymer chemistry. I was a polymer chemist for Procter and Gamble for a number of years, and believe it or not, I worked on hair care products. Do not take my current hairstyle to be any reflection on the products I made and worked on. I'm a speaker, educator. I do a lot in the community, and I've also had a lot of roles with SharePoint. I do a lot of work with Centric Consulting and have had a pretty nice relationship with them for a handful of years now. And many of those years with Centric, I've been working on Akumina digital workplaces, implementing them, helping customers augment them, architect them, and all sorts of things. I've got 2 kids, twins, Brendan and Sabrina. They're 12 years old. My wife, Tracy, is a psychologist and college professor. I'm a lover of all things donuts, and that picture in the lower right-hand corner hopefully makes that clear. And I like to tell people I'm 50% developer and 50% IT pro, so I'm something of a switch hitter, which makes me 100% confused most of the time. So that's me.
All right, Dave, you may begin.
So, thanks, Mike. So I think, from the perspective now, one of the big things, Sean, that I want to understand, and I'm sure the folks inside of the webinar who are watching today at home want to understand, is this overarching concept of a digital workplace strategy and how the modern internet fits in. I'd love if you could take a few minutes and talk about the state of Microsoft's modern workplace.
Sure, be happy to. So Microsoft's modern workplace was really established and took shape with Microsoft 365, formerly known as Office 365. Microsoft likes to play the name change game, and many of us just try to stay up to date and current so that we're in agreement on what we're actually talking about. Office 365, Microsoft 365 is Microsoft's best attempt at implementation of a modern workplace right now. And the emphasis is on meeting workers where they are. And by that, I mean trying to anticipate worker needs and to reorient what is classically a software product base into an offering that makes more sense for customers and digital workers. Microsoft 365 is cloud-centric, and I'm sure many of you are using it right now. Many of the workloads in Office 365, and by workload, I mean the individual verticals like SharePoint, Teams, what used to be Skype for Business, those. They're team-focused, and I don't just mean Microsoft Teams, but they're oriented towards delivering value and functionality that are oriented towards small groups of people working on a project together or trying to deliver something in concert. Many free organizations, sorry, I'm not even reading my own slide here. The nice thing about Microsoft 365 is it frees organizations from what I call non-value added IT chores. And these are work that, if you think about the standard IT pro or admin, their role 5 to 10 years ago looked vastly different than it does nowadays. These people were, in large part, maintaining large on-premises networks, server farms, trying to troubleshoot problems related to those. And when Office 365 came along and the shift of the functionality that those servers would provide went to the cloud, that freed many of admins and IT pros from those sorts of low value add chores like maintaining servers. So instead of maintaining servers, those people could then focus on more value added tasks like helping customers with requests they have regarding solution development, architecting, arrangements of cloud services, and configuring cloud services for direct use by customers. Microsoft says that Office 365, of course, is an evergreen service, which is a nice way of saying it's always changing and evolving. Evergreen sounds much more genteel. And it's true. So it really pays to stay on top of it. That, evergreen nature means that we're getting new features and fixes all the time. Microsoft has really done a good job in moving to a role where they listen and respond to customers. Anyone who was with Office 365 during its early days remembers that anytime something went wrong, Office 365's nature back in those days was it was very opaque and there was very little communication about what was going on. So if you experienced a service outage, you didn't know who to talk to, whether you should open a support ticket, or what you should do. So nowadays, Office 365, Microsoft 365, of course, we have an entire suite of tools within the admin panels to provide us with current up-to-the-date information. We get lots of proactive pushes on issues as they occur, as well as features that are rolling out. Microsoft's target for new feature releases. Microsoft does a lot of dog fooding, specifically with Microsoft 365 services right now. And by dog fooding, I mean they are using the very services that they're making available to us. So they feel internally the same pain that we as customers do. And so that's how services like User Voice became very prominent in being able to report feature requests, fix requests. If you go out to User Voice, and if you Google that or bang it, you'll find it very easily, but it gives you the ability to make suggestions for products and vote on them. So that's something we have available to us. And as many of you know, Microsoft's direction going forward, they are committed to the cloud. That was said, cloud first, and they've been driving that home. It's part of their vision going forward, and they are very much doing, day in, day out, things are changing so that they become solidly cloud first and rolling out to on-prem only after things are proven in the cloud realm. So we flip-flopped. We don't get first release on-prem anymore. We get that in the cloud. So that's Microsoft's committed direction, and that's kind of how they've brought about this modern workplace. So with that being said, it comes down to, are they actually giving us employees an experience that makes the most sense for them? And I think that Dave may have something to say about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Super helpful, overview. I think, from my side, one of the big things we see is obviously Microsoft's making all of these tools available. And look, there's an entire ecosystem of technology inside of our customer stacks that go well beyond Microsoft. So it could be CRM or could be ERP, travel and expense tools. I mean, the list of tools just goes on in terms of these applications that our employees need to interact with in order to drive productivity, in order to communicate better and collaborate. And I think that the big thing when I'm talking with CIOs or when I'm talking with VPs of corporate comms or CHROs, I often sit down with them and I say, look, you're telling us you want to go on this modern workplace, digital workplace strategic journey, but what are you trying to build and who are you trying to build it for? And I'll often pose the question of saying, are you building this for your business or are you building this for your employees? And you can't answer both. And it certainly kicks off, in some cases, a tenuous conversation set around making sure that everything that's being built is being done so with the concept of the employee in the middle. And I think for us, that's what chasing the right employee experience is all about. We consult with our customers that you're not building one digital workplace. If you're doing this right, you're actually building thousands of digital workplaces that fall underneath one cohesive digital workplace strategy. And so ensuring that you can deliver information on any device at any time and in any language, that's fundamentally putting power in the hands of individual employees, whether it's the C-suite, your management team, your deskless workers, those who are in customer service, those who are actually making products on the assembly line. All of these different types of employees need to consume and touch and feel information differently. And so when you think about creating digital workplace, it isn't a concept of a one-size-fits-all world. Rather, it's about creating the right digital workplace or the right employee experience for each of those users. And I think a big part of that, and we've seen this as tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams have really taken the world by storm, that when you think about actually being able to deliver this information to users, it's going beyond and thinking beyond just an intranet. I'll be the first to say that the true modern intranet is a staple foundation point of this broader digital workplace strategy, but it is just that. It's one piece of a broader element. And we often sit and talk and enhance the experiences that our customers are able to deliver their employees by thinking more broadly about the interaction that's going to take place between technology and communications and culture in putting these employees in a position to fundamentally do their jobs better, faster, and easier. And what that comes down to is, how are these employees communicating, not just with the business, but with each other? How are they collaborating? How are your power users creating and distributing content? How are you ensuring that it doesn't matter what device a user wants to consume information on, they have the luxury to do that? And how are you making sure that you're building it on top of an extensible integration layer that brings in all of those different workloads Sean was talking about earlier in the Microsoft ecosystem, as well as all of the other third-party tools and even your own homegrown cloud applications or on-prem applications that you've created that fundamentally come together to deliver this digital intelligence that allows these employees to make more productive decisions about the work they're producing, creating more self-worth for them and more value for their business overall. So Sean, we've talked a lot about sort of where Microsoft is and where they're going. We've talked a little bit about what the broader concept of how you think about an employee-centric approach works. But I guess the real question, and I get this all the time, is what does an enhanced employee experience really mean? So through your lens, I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Well, an enhanced employee experience, of course, in my opinion, and what I've seen, tends to mean something that's going to add value to the base platform and perhaps enhanced functionality in the form of new capabilities, especially capabilities that are oriented towards a specific end. And so the intranet, as you so clearly pointed out, made a very good point with it. You know, the intranet is a stable part and a foundation of the experience these days, but it's not the entire show. It's really just kind of the entry point. And so that gets us to, SharePoint being Microsoft's intranet platform, if you will. They've made investments in the platform in the form of modern. It probably pays to spend a little bit of time talking about modern and what modern SharePoint really means. So with that, I want to do a brief overview of modern, kind of how we got to where we are, as well as what that really means, and perhaps, if you haven't seen modern yet, some of the aspects of it. So what is modern SharePoint? And I will get to the PlayStation game here on the left in just a second, but it helps to know a little bit about the evolution of SharePoint. And like I said, I'm an old guard SharePoint user, implementer, developer, administrator, going all the way back. Back in the days of Tahoe server, SharePoint Team Services 2001, it was a very different platform back then. It was a set of web capabilities firmly organized around document sharing and giving users a centralized repository with versioning capabilities and check-in, check-out. These were all novel things at the time. Nobody else was really doing that in web form. Since that time, SharePoint has gone through a number of changes and iterations. Capabilities have been introduced with each version, as well as sunset. And SharePoint took on the role of, being the Swiss Army knife of web platforms. It was said that, you could do anything with SharePoint. Just because you could didn't mean you should, but it was the Swiss Army knife. It had a tool in there for everything. And like many organizations that invested in SharePoint, there was a cost associated with that investment. And so we get into what became known, commonly as the hammer and nail problem. If all I've got is a hammer, a really big Swiss Army knife called SharePoint, everything starts to look like a nail. Many organizations tried to solve problems and build solutions around SharePoint that honestly would have been better built through other tool sets. And I know in my history of consulting, I've cautioned many organizations against going forward with a SharePoint solution they want to build. Many of them chose to go forward anyway, and there was a lot of pain that came out of that because you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So this, Swiss Army knife nature of SharePoint. Years ago, I was a program manager and more of a product manager for a software company. And I was interviewed for Redmond magazine, and I made the mistake with my lack of media experience. At that time, I was trying to reflect SharePoint's kind of Swiss Army nature, and I described it as this big ball of junk rolling downhill with everything it goes over glomming onto that. And everyone if you've ever played Katamari Damacy on the PlayStation, the goal of the game is to roll this ball of junk over everything on the landscape to make the ball bigger and bigger. And that's what I liken SharePoint to. Well, naturally, such an analogy, when directly quoted out of context, did not endear me to very many people. And so I got a lot of media training pronto right after that experience. But since that time, Microsoft has sought to position SharePoint as still it's an intranet foundation, but they've gone to honing more what it does and reducing feature set rather than growing it, and reducing it to focus on a few key capabilities. At the same time, we're seeing SharePoint Online develop capabilities and a look and feel that's more modern in nature. And it is the cornerstone of the Microsoft 365 experience. SharePoint underpins many of the different workloads. So if you used OneDrive, your OneDrive file share, and you sync that with your computer, you're syncing to a SharePoint location. It's actually your old MySite location, the shared documents library. SharePoint underpins Teams. It's the storage for Teams data. And there was a point in time when Microsoft was trying to decide, do we still call this SharePoint, or do we just let the name SharePoint drift away and kind of section up SharePoint into its various constituent workloads and align it with other products? But they stuck with the SharePoint name for brand recognition. And so SharePoint Modern has a number of goals, mostly around modernization of the experience, but again, honing certain capabilities and giving them more relevance in the modern digital world. And so going to the next slide, if you've never used modern SharePoint, the old way of looking at SharePoint, we call classic SharePoint. Microsoft is not doing anything with classic. Classic is going to be around. A lot of people are afraid that Microsoft is going to sunset classic at some point. They may very well do that, but they have no plans for that now. And that's been stated time and time again by different folks in a position to speak to that at Microsoft. You won't probably see active development on anything that's classic because all development is focused on modern now. But some of the changes we get with modern are attempts to overcome some of the limitations with classic SharePoint. Anyone who recalls SharePoint publishing sites, one of the very first things many implementers would do with SharePoint, and many companies would request, is make it look like something other than SharePoint. We like SharePoint and what it does, but we don't want our intranet to look like SharePoint. And so just about any engagement with SharePoint involving the implementation of an intranet involved changing branding, which could be done. There were numerous different ways to do it, but it was, let's say nowadays, a more painful process than it needs to be. It involves changing master pages, changing style sheets. Any branding that you did for SharePoint, you often were working against the grain. It did not have a modern look and feel. It was old HTML that used inappropriate HTML tags and structures to do things like position elements on the page. Microsoft has made gains in that with each version of SharePoint that's been released, but it's only with modern SharePoint that we truly get to this approach, which is compliant with modern web standards, Section 508 compliance as well. It is responsive entirely, so you can look at it on mobile and on a browser or tablet and get the responsive behavior you expect. Navigation has changed with a modern approach. Many of you have probably heard about the concept of hub sites now. SharePoint used to be building site collections with lots of subsites under them. Microsoft wants and is recommending that we all go away from that towards just using site collections as the unit of deployment and building. So forget about subsites as much as you can, build site collections. Well, anybody who took that approach initially had problems with things like navigation. And so hub sites were introduced. Hub sites give us the ability to logically organize and reorganize site collections into a cohesive structure. So it helps with things like navigation, with search, which has gotten much better. Microsoft Search is really come a long way since even the acquisition of Fast back in 2010 days. You know, Naomi Penny has a rich history with search, and she brought a lot of experience when she joined the product team. So search goes across everything in SharePoint and Office 365 now. And we got the power of machine learning behind that. So tools like Delve give us an enhanced experience. So publishing pages, permissions, performance in particular gets much better with a modern experience. SharePoint pages, if you've ever looked at Fiddler Trace or the SharePoint diagnostic tool set that Scott Stewart and his team brought up, you'll see just how much stuff is getting pulled across the wire with a classic SharePoint tool set, with a SharePoint site. And modern trims all that down. It makes use of content delivery networks, or CDN. Much of the load has been shifted to client side. And many of these changes started in the 2013 days, but they're only coming into what I would consider maturity in the last 6 months to year, maybe a little bit longer. You know, the app model, which replaced our old server-side development model, was introduced in 2013. Nowadays, we have the SharePoint framework and client-side development. Cloud workload and delivery integration is very important. So workloads are being integrated more so than they were with SharePoint, where it relied on its own workflow service, and then the Azure workflow manager. Now we've got things like Flow, or Power Automate as it's called. We've got Power Apps, and all of these tend to use SharePoint in some way, shape, or form. So SharePoint is really a tool set that's been evolving. It's becoming a little more specific in what it does, but is being better integrated and better represented on pages. So, you know, that kind of brings us to the, you know, same but different argument. We got much the same thing. Can we go to the next slide? We've got much the same thing we've been working with, because SharePoint's still list-based. All content still exists in these lists, which are really, you can think of as database tables. But the modern page editing experience has been greatly enhanced. The WYSIWYG nature of modern pages. So if you take a communication site or a modern team site, even though we've always had web parts got kind of long in the tooth. They were revolutionary when they were introduced, but over time they kind of, you know, got old. They took on this older look. And so, you know, oftentimes I'll use the Men in Black reference, Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. Will Smith goes into his, you know, you used to drive the old busted wheels, I drive the new hotness, old and busted, new hotness. The old SharePoint is old, well, maybe it's old busted hotness, as they eventually came to say in that movie, but it has clearly evolved in that time. So, you know, many of these different things are reflected in what we see and work with in SharePoint and on the pages, both in using it and consuming it as an end user, but also as someone building with SharePoint. Naturally, this translates into support, operations, IT, management wins, because somebody else is managing SharePoint. The other unspoken fact is that SharePoint, with each release, became more and more complex to try and roll out properly. And so lots of organizations were making lots of deployment errors and missteps, which got very costly. And so it became harder and harder to administer SharePoint. So moving it to the cloud for administration and maintenance became a real cost and time saving for many IT organizations. So like I said, the content experience and workflows have improved with other tools as well, but you know, it still comes down to, what about users? And you know, the content experience in particular around editing content, we're still working with lists and things like that. And this is where talk about the digital workplace, oftentimes we think about just the platform, but what about the users and what about their content experience? What are we doing to enhance that for them? I'm not sure modern SharePoint is all the way there yet, but I know that, digital workplace platforms like Akumina have a lot to add and bring to that game. So with that, I'll transition over to you, Dave.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sean, and that's a super helpful overview. We run into people constantly, and those are people at organizations who are dabbling in modern or have gone all in modern, or just trying to figure out how to move their entire classic infrastructure to modern. And one of the reasons why I think Akumina has been as successful as it has out in the market is because we're solving real world problems for these organizations, right? I can tell you that the concept of Akumina is built on sort of three core pillars, right? When you think about your digital workplace experience and you think about building out what is going to be the new thing that drives productivity across your organization, it has to be easy to implement, it has to be easy to operate, and it has to be easy to manage. These seem like ubiquitous terms and marketing mumbo jumbo, but the reality of it is I've literally sat in front of thousands of organizations over the last 5 years, and I can distill down all of their pain into everything they have was really hard to implement. No one knows how to operate it, and it's an albatross to manage. And so for us, trying to figure out how we can support making sure it's easy to implement, operate, and manage is a critical success factor for Akumina going forward as an application that is built to support, work with, and enhance the experience that something like modern SharePoint gives you. And when you think about sort of where Akumina fits in this intranet platform or digital workplace platform, or as some of the analysts have started to call us, the employee experience platform world, there's a couple things that make us different from everyone else. And these things should not be shocking, because I think for medium and large enterprises around the globe, these are the things that are actually solving problems. I will tell you the number one secret sauce inside of the Akumina platform is we do not store any data. We do not have a database. So what we're delivering you is a better and easier way to take advantage of Microsoft's innovations in SharePoint and in modern SharePoint, while at the same time making sure that you can deliver the right experience to the right user and not be worried that your data is going to be stored in some other third-party tool. And everything about our platform sort of cascades down from that, right? We focus intently on allowing organizations to create a single pane of glass where I'm bringing data in from lots of different places, and I'm breaking the identity of the user, back to Sean's point a minute ago, breaking the identity of the user to those different systems. There are literally thousands of people that work at every one of our customers. And for the most part, unless they're a SharePoint, admin or engineer or developer, or they're a Workday engineer, developer, admin, or a ServiceNow one, it doesn't say in someone who's joining the HR team at a major enterprise, you need to be an expert in SharePoint. You need to be an expert in Workday. What it says is you need to be an expert in your job, and we're hiring you because of your experience to make our HR team better, or to improve collaboration or productivity or communication. So for us, how can we break that identity between those back-end systems? And in many cases with these enterprises, there's tons of back-end systems, while at the same time enabling total visual control for our customers. I would tell you in my experience, and I know Sean shares this as well, that brand and design are more important to B2B enterprises today than they ever have been. And so making sure that we can echo your brand that is so prevalent out in the marketplace internally to all your employees is critically important, while enabling your business to take control of this new experience and not only use lots of capabilities that exist out of the box, but at the same time put you in a position where you can expand and you're not boxed in terms of the experience that you want to deliver. And so that brings me down the path of understanding, well, how do modern SharePoint and Akumina fit together? We often talk about this concept of 1 + 1 = 3. There are some critical success factors for us in terms of building this platform where modern SharePoint is one of the key foundations underneath it. And that's making sure that we can deliver a capability to a user set or to an employee base and to an enterprise that is easy for them to operate and easy for them to use, as we've talked about, while at the same time we're not blocking any of that awesome innovation that Microsoft or these other subsystems are surfacing as a part of the sub-applications that bring together under the umbrella of this digital workplace. It's funny, as modern SharePoint has become more successful out in the market and really redefined the SharePoint brand, I would tell you that I'm often in conversations, usually with CIOs, and they'll say, well, talk to me about, I want to understand the versus. I want to understand Akumina versus modern SharePoint, or modern SharePoint versus Akumina. And I often sit back with a smile on my face and say, there is no verse. If you're trying to compare, should I use Akumina or should I use modern SharePoint, you're actually asking the wrong question. Because Akumina's entire value proposition is delivering capabilities on top of modern SharePoint and the rest of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem and the rest of the third-party tools in your sort of quiver to put you in a position to be successful in delivering those thousands of unique, hyper-personalized digital workplace experiences for every one of your users. And so for us, we talk all the time about the 10 most important factors of making modern SharePoint, the rest of Microsoft 365, and your overarching digital workplace strategy significantly more amazing than it is today. And those 10 factors are represented on the screen in front of you, but it's everything from having that design freedom of total visual control, being able to deliver on any device, in any language, even in a native iOS or Android app, while making sure that I'm integrating across my entire stack and focusing more on the contextual experiences that each of my users needs to have. Again, I talked earlier about the C-suite and executive leadership and your knowledge workers and your deskless staff and your customer service floor. Every one of these aspects of your workforce have to interact with what you're calling your digital workplace differently. So you can't deliver a one-size-fits-all experience. You need the power and the innovation of everything that Microsoft is delivering with modern SharePoint and with Microsoft 365, and then the power of Akumina to help you create the right digital workplace for every single person that exists inside of your workforce. So with that said, we're going to take a couple of minutes here and give you a quick walkthrough of the Akumina technology.
Akumina is the world's leading digital workplace software provider. Our employee experience platform was created based on a simple yet powerful belief that a personalized digital workplace can empower your entire workforce, from the C-suite to your deskless staff, to work smarter, not harder. Traditional intranets or portals are nothing more than content graveyards, inaccessible, hard to navigate, and frustrating to update or evolve. Akumina's platform offers an innovative mobile-first solution that can be delivered on any device at any time and in over 200 different languages. Akumina lets you get up and running quickly, branded specifically for your business, and extensible enough to be customized to solve your most pressing critical business issues. Akumina thinks differently about your back-end technology ecosystem by creating an immersive, single pane of glass experience. Every worker gets a hyper-personalized and flexible digital workplace that increases productivity, efficiency, collaboration, and communication. Akumina's employee experience platform seamlessly integrates with leading HRIS platforms, such as Workday, leading ERP platforms such as SAP, leading CRM platforms such as Salesforce.com, leading service management platforms such as ServiceNow, leading travel and expense platforms such as Concur, and many more to create consumer-like mobile-friendly tools uniquely targeted and personalized to every user across your entire workforce. Akumina's App Manager is an award-winning content and site management system that empowers content authors and power users to easily create content once and publish everywhere. At the same time, Akumina's platform allows users to easily build pages and sites from scratch using the Experience Builder, while targeting those experiences to very specific segments of your workforce using Akumina's Persona Engine. Once pages are personalized and created, users are able to test, target, and tailor personalized content to every user in your company. With Akumina, gone are the days of waiting for IT to spin up a new site experience for you. With Akumina's provisioning engine, business users have the tools to stand up new sites in minutes underneath predefined governance structures. By offering a customizable, brandable, and mobile-first platform, Akumina delivers a personalized, relevant, and engaging digital experience to every employee in any browser, in a native mobile app on iOS or Android, and even on an overhead digital display. Akumina has transformed the way your workforce interacts with your company, your content, and one another. With Akumina, every employee will love the way they work. Akumina, love the way you work.
I hope that was helpful for everyone to be able to see how the Akumina platform in a very short window of time is solving major problems across digital workplace strategies all over the globe. So appreciate that opportunity. I will also say, I know we've talked a lot up until this point about sort of the plus, not the verse. So Akumina plus modern SharePoint and how that's creating the right experience for your users. Attached to this webinar in your GoToMeeting overview area is a white paper developed by the Akumina team in conjunction with Microsoft that will give you an even deeper view of those 10 critical success factors we talked about earlier and what it can mean for your organization to think about taking the next step on this modern workplace journey. Sean, would you mind taking a minute, though, and maybe talk with the folks on the line about Centric Consulting and how they approach interacting and working with organizations such as those who are on the webinar with us today?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Dave. Centric Consulting is a national consulting group that focuses on becoming your trusted advisor. I've been working, like I said, with Centric for a number of years now, doing lots of Akumina implementation work. I've been working primarily with Centric's enterprise collaboration group, where the focus typically is on intranets, the SharePoint workload, Teams, all of Microsoft's offerings towards collaboration, building intranets and whatnot. Akumina is a core component of the Centric offering set, and anytime we're talking to a company about an intranet, we naturally bring up Akumina because I hope, with the video you just saw, it makes it clear that Akumina offers quite a bit on top of just garden variety SharePoint. And I don't say this as a plug. This is just through personal experience. I see that it provides so many different value adds just for content editors and people trying to build sites. I talked about those, master page changes and all the ugliness that would require technical developers to get in and make changes. Akumina simplifies and abstracts away a lot of that stuff. And so Centric is an Akumina partner. We've been working with them for years now. And, we focus on many different areas and verticals, along from strategy and planning through implementation. Centric's got branding resources. We've got all sorts of folks. So, if you ever need a company to act as your partner and trusted advisor, I'm sure they'd love to talk to you. So moving on to the next slide. One of Centric's offerings is this thing called Apex. I'll just spend a couple seconds talking about it. It's oriented towards bringing Akumina into your environment on a time-boxed and cost basis. So you know what you're getting up front, how long it's going to take. We have done this process several times. And it's worked out really well. So for a 16-week engagement, if you're looking to implement Akumina in your environment, please talk to the folks at Centric. The contact email is there, and I know we'll have additional information after this. So next slide.
Yeah, that sounds great, Sean. We're coming up to the sort of Q&A portion of this. We'll open it up for live Q&A, as well as there have been a lot of really good questions that have been put into the GoToWebinar console. So we'll make sure that we'll do that. We also have one additional poll before we conclude today's webinar. But from an Akumina perspective, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address was on the first slide. as well as you can go to www.akumina.com and request a demo if you want to get a deeper personalized tour of the platform, or just hop on the phone with one of our solution consultants. And the same for Centric. So as Sean said a minute ago, to connect with them, feel free to reach out via email or head directly to their website, centricconsulting.com. We certainly appreciate their partnership, not only on this webinar, but with our dozens of joint customers that we've got together around the globe, who are solving these very real problems that each of you on the line also have. So Mike, do you want to launch your final poll, and then perhaps we can move into Q&A?
All right. Thank you all for your time today. We're going to launch one final poll just to see who would like some additional information and a reach out from Akumina. I'll leave that up for 30 seconds. And as Dave alluded to, we'll jump right into Q&A. All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to close the poll at this time.
Thanks, Mike. So from a Q&A perspective, I want to touch on, there were a handful of really good questions that came in. So maybe I'll touch on those first, and then we'll open the line up for people to ask their live questions. One of the first questions that came in was in regards to identity management. And the question was, can an organization bring in through the Akumina platform employee profiles through Workday? And the answer to that is yes. In fact, I would tell you that commonly across our customers, you see organizations that have multiple identity providers sort of all operating in concert, right? You have employee profiles in Workday or some other HRIS system. You have employee profiles in Active Directory or in Okta or some other authentication provider. You may even have identity profiles, user profiles down at the individual SharePoint level, or ServiceNow has profile data as well. One of the advantages that Akumina brings to the table is it allows you to actually deliver a mashed up 360-degree view of that user. So if I have an individual user, I'm able to map user IDs together about that user. That user is, Jane Smith, and I've got attributes in lots of different places. I can bring those attributes together so that I'm delivering a more holistic, personalized approach in terms of my content targeting and the personalization of personas that I happen to be associating her with. One of the next questions was, what is the typical size of customer that you work with? I would tell you that our smallest customer has about 1,000 employees, and our largest customer has 400,000 employees. When you look at sort of our target enterprise, it's an organization who's bet their business on the Microsoft stack, among other technologies, and has employees and is looking to drive a more productive workforce and give a voice to each of their employees. So from that perspective, there's really no size limit in terms of the types of organizations that we work with. Another question came in, and this, I think, was typed in right after Sean asked his question. The question's regards to navigation in hub sites. So while a hub site allows for you to have a consistent navigation across a series of site collections, the question is, when you get into a situation where an organization has multiple hub sites, navigation becomes an issue because there isn't a global navigation delivered by modern SharePoint that supports multiple hub sites. Akumina has actually worked with the Microsoft engineering team on this, and we have delivered capability inside our platform that actually solves that problem. So regardless of how many hub sites you have and then corresponding site collections under those hub sites, I can use the Akumina application extension capabilities in SPFX to actually deliver a central global navigation that runs across every site collection, including those that are categorized via different hub sites. And then the last question that was typed in here was specific to who are the teams at Microsoft that Akumina works with. And so obviously we have an incredibly tight relationship with the Microsoft SharePoint team. We work heavily with the Microsoft Graph team, Ina Arenas and her team. We use the Microsoft Graph API very extensively. You can imagine that we work really closely with the Teams team and the Azure team. And most recently, we've started doing a lot of work with the Project Cortex team because we view Project Cortex as one of the key capabilities that Microsoft's bringing to market that when integrated correctly into this broader strategy will put you in a position where you can be successful and support the mechanisms for this journey. I would like to now, Mike, I don't know if there's a button we have to push or anything, but I'd love to open it up for live questions if there was any questions that didn't get asked through the console.
Sure, we just had a couple that came through. One's from Rich in the audience. So this is a question, sounds like for you, Dave. Are chatbots available within Akumina or through integrations?
Hey, Rich, so absolutely, and we can certainly show you lots of different examples, and we've collaborated with Centric, even with some of their customers on this. Akumina doesn't provide natively a bot application because, as I'm sure you can imagine, we leverage the Azure bot framework under the covers. But whether it's self-service capabilities or the ability to actually create content or the ability to go through process optimization flows, so think about onboarding capabilities or offboarding capabilities for employees, integrating chatbots as well as more elements of AI and machine learning is an integral part of what Akumina brings to the table.
Thank you, Dave. We just got another one from Jeff in the audience. He references your talk about integrations with Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow. He wants to know how easy is it for one of your clients to create a custom integration with a solution that's not supported out of the box?
Hey, Jeff, good question. And not shockingly, you're not alone, right? In terms of integrating with those systems. What I will tell you is that the purpose of third-party integrations in Akumina isn't to go ahead and rebuild those third-party systems. Workday, ServiceNow, Salesforce, they each do thousands of different things, tasks, capabilities, functions, and features, right? The idea when you're thinking about a broader integrated strategy is how do I take the most commonly done things, the things that people are doing daily or weekly or even monthly, and integrate that into the experience so that the user can have that single pane of glass. We ship out of the box with integrations to all three of these providers that you've made reference to, as well as through our Service Hub, which is the Akumina Enterprise Service Bus on the back end, deliver the integration points to their APIs. So what that means is that if there's a capability you're looking for and integrating with, for example, ServiceNow, but it isn't a quote-unquote out-of-the-box widget in Akumina, you have the ability to go in and create that custom widget against the already existing API integration in our Service Hub by simply creating a widget against our SDK. And all of that is fully documented on Akumina.com in terms of how do I build a custom widget? How do I build a custom integration? How do I leverage or branch off of an existing integration that you might already have? Really good question, and certainly please follow up with me. I'm glad to go one level deeper with you.
Yeah, Dave, if I can jump in for just a second. As a developer and somebody who's developed solutions with Akumina, I'll add to that by saying that Akumina makes it very easy for developers to get additional value-added information with just the base platform. Akumina has a user context as well as a site context object that is very rich with properties. It's very easy to integrate web service, and common web service usage patterns are easy to implement with widgets and other tools. If you've worked with promises and JavaScript, you have some idea how to do this, make web service calls. But like Dave said, the Akumina site itself has a number of really good examples that lay this out, as well as pieces in the platform that they've made more generic to rapidly facilitate the development of functionality you might need. So as a developer myself, it's been very easy to do this sort of thing that you're talking about. So it's a good question.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That perspective is awesome. There are, you guys aren't going to, well, maybe you will believe it, but it's a little bit awesome and shocking to me. There are like 45 more questions in the queue, and we simply just don't have enough time with 2 minutes left to be able to get to all of them. So I'll tell you, between myself and Sean and our teams, we will ensure that we extract those questions from GoToWebinar and ensure that members of our teams follow up with you directly specific to your questions so that we can get those answered. But Sean, I really appreciate the time as always. This is a topic, obviously, that we both have real strong passion about, and we certainly appreciate the partnership that we have with you and the organization, and thanks for taking the time to do this webinar with us today.
You bet, Dave. Thanks for the invite. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.